Hello.
Hello.
Nice to
Happy
see you.
Tuesday. Oh,
Happy
nice to see
Tuesday.
you. Oh, let's just keep talking over each other the whole podcast. I think that'd be
That's a pro move right there. Absolutely. Let's jump into news. You have some really good news stories for us today.
excellent. Yeah, I'm really excited. There's always a lot happening in the
That's
world of
right.
weed.
That's true.
And today we're traveling to Mexico,
Mm,
where the Mexican Supreme Court has just decriminalized the private consumption of cannabis. So, what that means, it's a little bit of a complicated ruling, but
mm.
people are now allowed to smoke cannabis in the comfort of their own home. Of course, this comes with a few concerns from cannabis activists because the legislation does not include the commercialization or possession or transportation of cannabis.
Mm.
But there is other legislation that is up for vote for in Mexico. The Mexican House approved legalizing recreational use of cannabis all across the board, which would let people grow at home and open up for a market. The Senate has yet to approve that. So there's still more legislation that has to get passed in Mexico to really excite the people. But this was a huge first step, the decriminalization of private consumption. Big move, Mexico.
That's awesome. I kind of thought that it was already legal in Mexico. I guess you got to follow the details of these government regimes. It kind of sounds like the U.S. We're like, is it legal? Is it not legal? Some people say it is. Some people say it isn't. But that's great. That's great that the Supreme Court is basically saying this is a right for people. Forget just like passing the laws. Like, no, this is actually something that people have a right to do according to the Constitution. That's cool.
Precisely. It's a huge move, and perhaps the confusion, the outside confusion, comes from the cartels kind of making cannabis seem normalized. But and then that's another huge hope for the people of Mexico is that as cannabis becomes more and more mainstream, it will create a safer environment for a lot of people that might be involved in the illegal
Yeah.
trafficking of cannabis.
Yeah. Hopefully they won't
Yeah.
be trapped in like the situation we're in with all these different layers. The no transportation thing reminds me of the Netherlands. The Netherlands been really weird for a long time. Like it's legal in Amsterdam, but it's illegal to transport it. So it has to kind of come out of thin air somewhere. So a lot of that sort of we're not quite
The
looking at
don't
the
ask,
situation. Don't
don't tell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, that's good news.
Yeah.
South of the border. And we had our own Supreme Court justice. Well, I don't think I'm going to say that Clarence Thomas is my Supreme Court justice because he really is really backwards in so many different ways. And it's really interesting that he was the guy who issued a 5-page memorandum on a cannabis tax issue,
Hmm.
saying that the patchwork of laws uh, don't make any sense and may be unconstitutional. It's interesting. He basically was pointing out the obvious, but the don't ask, don't tell. You know, the federal government has been doing, signaling different policies, letting states legalize, issuing memoranda, occasionally saying we're going to leave you alone. And his perspective on that was that may be, not very rule based from a constitutional perspective.
Yeah, you could definitely. I feel as though, due to how conservative he historically has been,
Mm,
his new opinion, or him speaking his opinion on cannabis, comes from a place of frustration,
mm,
almost criticizing the United States, our current government rulings on cannabis. But
yeah,
it was very exciting to hear the conversation happen in the Supreme Court and just
yeah.
stoke another fire, stoke more headlines here in the States. But again, just reiterating what you said, Clarence Thomas basically said that the prohibition on intrastate use and the cultivation of cannabis just may no longer be necessary
Mm,
because every state has their own rulings on the matter, it doesn't make sense that the US government has this overarching ruling
Right.
itself, because we've kind of just let that all go anyways.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Probably basically signaling that we would like to see a case in the Supreme Court where we can basically rule that, just like the Mexican Supreme Court ruled that this is the right of people, or probably more strictly like something around interstate commerce and the right of the federal government to probably send it back to the federal government and say, you guys have to get this straight. You
Mhm.
can't. I try to explain to people outside of the US, like I work in the cannabis business. Is it legal? Well, it's legal in California, kind of, but it's not really legal in the United States. And that's really weird. I also think that, so this this would be really interesting out of left field if the path to legalization didn't happen through the legislature, didn't happen through a presidential leadership, but happened through the judicial branch. That would be, I never thought that it could happen that way, but that would be pretty amazing.
Me either. Well said. Thank you for that. All right, guys, fingers crossed. I guess we're rooting for Clarence Thomas now, all of a sudden.
No, we're not. I'm not rooting for Clarence Thomas, and I just want to say one thing. I think as the issue becomes more and more mainstream, I think there'll be a lot of politicians that start to hold the banner of cannabis
Mhm.
freedom, and they'll be the same politicians that supported throwing thousands of people in jail and persecuting people, millions of people for using the plant. So we also have to be careful about who we give credit to and who we choose as our heroes, because people are going to realize they're on the wrong side of this, and then they're going to try to revise their own personal history. So Clarence
Mm.
Thomas doesn't get a pass for me.
Okay, thank you for that.
All right, that's there you
Um,
go.
in some lighter news,
Okay,
let's pivot. Let's
let's do
pivot
it.
to sports.
Okay.
Celebratory arena. The crowd is cheering.
Mm-hmm.
Do you like basketball? Are you an NBA
Yeah,
fan? You are?
I like the NBA. Yeah, it's fun. I think it's a really great league.
You know what? I'm not a big sports gal, but I can at least sit through a basketball game and be
Mm.
entertained.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly entertained by this news story that came out.
Okay.
Our very own Lakers star Alex Caruso was just arrested by Texas A&M police. He actually went to Texas A&M. That's where he played college basketball. And as he was departing on a flight from Texas, his bag was searched, and they found a grinder full of weed, or half full of weed, and he actually was arrested for cannabis possession and
Yeah.
had to pay a $3,000 bail bond,
Mm.
$550 fine. And the way that the media was reporting on this particular instance, they said, oh, Caruso was caught with less than 2 ounces of weed. They never specified the amount. They said
Yeah.
it was a grinder full of weed, unless his grinder was
Yeah.
the biggest grinder known to man. Yeah, it was certainly less
It
than
was,
2 ounces of weed. They
there
made
was
him
a
sound
bunch
like a
of
criminal.
dust in there. There was like, that totally sucks.
Yeah, and meanwhile, the NBA, his very own league, is no longer randomly testing
Right.
their players for cannabis. So I think this certainly did not damage his reputation in the eyes of, his teammates, the league, the general public. If anything, it actually made Caruso seem a little cooler to me.
Maybe,
So,
yeah. Well, you're also calling him a Lakers star, and that's pretty good because I don't really think he's a star, but
okay,
Lakers bench player Alex Caruso, I think that that's such bad luck, and that's just really really sucks that like these cops at the Texas A&M airport, the Texas A&M cops are gonna like arrest some dude for having a grinder with a little bit of weed in it.
their
I
own
think
golden boy too. It's
I
very
know he goes
interesting.
back to college probably to, I don't know, do some charity event.
And you know what? When people are nervous to fly with cannabis, I'm not saying that I recommend it, but there are actually so few arrests that occur at American airports
Yes.
for cannabis possession. So this was a particularly rare instance, and it is disappointing to see that it at least he's an NBA player that can pay a $3,000 bail bond and $500 fine, no problem. And this will make him even more of a celebrity. So, you know, not
I
the
once
worst,
got
but
caught in LaGuardia Airport with weed. I was on a work trip. It was like 5:30 in the morning. I had no idea that I had weed in my bag. Was half asleep, flying to Cincinnati to see my client, and I got through the line, and it made the detector go off, and I was like, I don't think we have it. She said, no, we have a lighter, and I was like, uh-oh. And she opens up. There's lighter, and there's some weed there. I'm like, I'm really, really sorry. I that was a complete mistake. I'm really, really sorry. And the woman looked me in the eye, and she's like, okay, I'm going to let you go, but be careful. They may not be so nice in Cincinnati.
wow.
It was like 15 years ago. So
Did you have to throw it away or did she let you take it
no,
with you?
no, she closed it up, and I was on my way. So at least I had some
Wow.
weed in Cincinnati, but um, yeah. So poor Alex Caruso you know, didn't get the same treatment I got,
He did
but
not. But speaking of Texas, where
okay.
the man was arrested,
Mhm.
will you talk to us about the latest
Oh
Texan
yeah.
statistic?
Yeah, so these Texas A&M cops are not really with it with the times. I guess Texas does have a pretty decent reputation for being conservative. It's probably a nice way of saying it for a lot of issues. But they just did a poll and found that 87% of people in the state support some type of legalization. The poll was kind of weirdly worded. So they asked people whether they basically support like unlimited use or medical use or restricted use. Um, but across party lines, people support decriminalization, which is true across the whole country. And I also thought it was interesting that it's changed quite a bit. So it's gone from 25-ish% 10 years ago to 20% down to 13% in Texas. So the wave of liberalization and respect for the freedoms for cannabis usage is also wafting over the Lone Star State.
And just to clarify, it was 13% of people who were totally in favor of full prohibition, but that's it. It was just
Correct.
13% of those polled
Correct. Which is
are
still a
still,
lot. Which is still a lot. The
yeah,
country, the U.S. population, that number is about 9%.
okay.
Yeah,
Thank you for that. Stat for stat.
stat for stat.
Makes it a little more comforting of a thought to understand that Texans are not necessarily their legislators. And obviously that's the case in many states and,
Yeah,
across the United States as well. But
yeah. Politicians are way behind the public on cannabis,
mhm.
um, and something will give. Something's got to give. But yeah, their social attitudes have changed very quickly. The laws have not changed quickly enough in most states and at the federal level.
All right, let's go global again
All right.
with our controversy of the
Controversy of the
week.
week.
Yeah. Bow, bow, bow. Well, a question that I would love to ask you, and this
Yes.
comes on the heels of another news story that the UN actually wants all nations, all members to ban cannabis advertising.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a great fear that nations are more interested in cannabis business than the health concerns that may come with consumption. And I ask you, Jeffrey, what do you think about cannabis advertising? Should there be restrictions? And if so, should they follow suit of the alcohol industry, or do you think that there should be a little more leeway for cannabis?
Yeah. So just a couple things on this issue that that the UN is coming out and saying that. First of all, I think it's a really good sign that the United Nations is taking this position because they're likely it's a process of preparing the groundwork for legalization, for guidelines for legalization globally.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the approach that I would expect they would take. They would try to lay the groundwork of how it should look, and because the United Nations has not come out in favor of cannabis legalization, but this could be a first step. It's also, I guess, without risking stating the obvious, there's a lot of advertising for a lot of bad things in this world, and for them to talk about the danger of cannabis, full stop, is when alcohol is advertised, and a lot of really dangerous things are advertised all over the globe. That's a little bit hard to swallow. But the question of advertising cannabis, it's a tough one for me. I think that in principle, I think brands need to figure out how to differentiate, and they need to be able to communicate their value proposition. But the guardrails of, first of all, communicating stuff that gets children interested in cannabis, I think we have to be really, really careful about that. And I don't think the cannabis industry in California, where I am, has been super responsible about that. I remember when I joined NorCal Cannabis, and I was like, my son was 11, and I explained to the family I was now in the weed business. And I was thinking, he's a skateboarder. I was thinking, man, I don't want to come home and see him wearing a weed brand skateboard shirt, but there are cannabis skateboard teams, and there's a lot of promotion and advertising that can reach children. I think we should be super careful about that. I've always think about when they lined up all those tobacco executives in front of Congress and brought them to heal for all of the crimes that they committed against the American people. And I think as cannabis industry leaders, we just have to really think about all of our collective actions and making sure that we're doing things that support public health. And I think advertising, promotion, there was a little brouhaha about candy-like products, so I think we should be really careful. So I don't know. I'm going on a long diatribe. So what do you think?
No, it's so interesting. I mean, it's a greater conversation of, are you pro censorship or not? I don't think you can just eliminate or reduce the conversation to just cannabis. I would hope, and I continue to hope, that the cannabis industry, its leaders, have some ethical foundation from which they are moving through the business universe with.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know if that is the case, but to your point, there are, walking around Los Angeles, I was in an intersection of 3 billboards yesterday, and each billboard it was for a movie, 2 movies, and a TV show, and everyone had a gun in their hand. And I was like, there's a kindergarten school, there's a preschool right across the street. So can we fully eliminate negative imagery or harmful advertisements from people's line of vision or from children's line of vision? No, but I do hope that at an individual level, or, per business, as you were saying, that we will forge the right path, just using common sense rules when it comes to advertising. Yeah, maybe, don't have cotton candy flavored gummies that are advertised right outside of a high school. And that's just up to businesses at the moment deciding whether or not they care. They care about being that in the community, being a positive influence or not.
Yeah. And if they don't, if the industry doesn't act responsibly, there will be repercussions from the government. I don't think it's a pro-censorship, anti-censorship question. I think these are very complicated questions. I don't think every business has a right to say anything it wants. And I believe people have the right to smoke cigarettes, but I don't think that they should be able to advertise cigarettes on Comedy Central or whatever kids are watching nowadays. I just don't. I don't think it's, so I think that there have to be rules, and there will be
Mm,
rules. And I think it's important to start talking about um, the relationship between um, promoting cannabis and supporting a healthy industry where people can make choices for themselves. And I think that's a complicated set of questions.
right on. Pro limitations, anti censorship.
Yeah, pro-responsible rules. Hopefully they'll come from the industry. If they don't, we're going to feel it.
Right on. Right
Yeah.
on, Jeffrey.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
your
Right
insights
on
on
to you
that.
too.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing up that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, is there anything else that you want to fight about or agree
Were we
on?
fighting? I don't think we were
No,
fighting. No,
absolutely not.
no, no. Great. Well, I'll see you in a couple of weeks, Brooke.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you guys, everyone, for listening. Make sure you're following us everywhere. And yeah, talk to you
All right.
soon.
See you later.